Hello, and welcome to our class 20, which is our last class this semester. I call this class Class Keepers, and here I'm going to summarize some of the most important ideas that we have seen through this semester. We started this semester reflecting about some wrong assumed ideas about language. These ideas assume that language is an empty vehicle that conveys pre-existing meanings about the world, that sees language as a neutral medium for communication, and also that reduces language to a set of formal rules. As we have seen through the semester, all of these ideas are incorrect, and what language is mainly is a social practice. This means that language is a set of socially embedded practices. This also means that every social interaction is mediated by language. And finally, this means that speaking is itself a form of social action. We also learned that language is dialogic. This means that meaning is constructed dialogically, that minimum you need a speaker and a listener. And that makes the word always be have someone else. Meaning is thus understood as a cooperative achievement. And not only among the speaker and the listener, but also involving the people who have used those expressions before, because each word, as Bakhtin reminds us, tastes of the context and context in which it has lived its socially charged life. Language, we've said that language is a social practice, but we have also explored together the social function of language. This means we have explored how communication creates social bonds, which are essential for the creation of communities, as Malinowski explored at the beginning of the 20th century. So language creates ties that are needed to develop unified social action and to develop affects, for example. So as Althusser told us, one comes to exist by virtue of being addressed by the other, or as Fanon said, to speak is to exist absolutely for the other. Language, as we saw, is also action. Why? Because things can be done in saying something or by saying something. But we always need to bear in mind the power relationships, as we have seen through this semester too, because to be able to give an order, one must have a recognized authority over the recipient of that order. And then also we have to think interculturally. So the role that is, for example, assigned to a speaker's intention can vary across societies. Because language is an action and can do things, with Butler, we saw how injurious language, how language there can wound. But that loosening link between the act of saying these words and the injury that they produce opened for Butler a possibility for a counter speech, a kind of talking back. And then language is also an action because, as we saw with Deborah Cameron, it is through language that we perform our identity. For example, our gender identity. We are constantly reaffirming and performing our gender identity through language in accordance with the cultural norms about gender. Then we also reflected together on what it means to know a language, what it is to know a language. As Malinowski told us at the beginning of the semester, if you were observing a conversation in a very different culture and you had a translator translating word by word, would you understand the conversation? Certainly not. Why? Because to use a language means to engage in a form of social action laden with cultural values. A language is connected to the way its speakers understand the world and live in it. Remember here, for example, the movie you watched, The Grammar of Happiness. Learning a language, as Becker said about his experience learning Asian languages, implies learning a new self-consciousness, implies learning a new way to be in oneself, a new inner dialogue. Then meaning is also constructed culturally. Remember the story of Laura Bohannan explaining the narrative of Hamlet, the plot of Hamlet to the thief in Africa. And to speak means above all to assume a culture, to support the weight of a civilization, as Fanon says. We also, even if briefly, because that was multilingualism, was our third topic in the class and we didn't have much time left, but we talk about different languages in the world. We saw there are 7,000 languages. They are very diverse. Again, think about, for example, the movie of The Grammar of Happiness about the Piraha, where Daniel Everett claimed that the Piraha language, for example, has no numbers and has no recursivity. So they are very diverse. And something important is that almost half of them, 40% of them, are endangered. This means that they are under risk to be extincted. And I ask you, what is it lost when a language is lost? But as you saw recently in the movie you watched, I Dream in Another Language, we always need to pay more attention to speakers than to languages. Then we also reflected about the violence that certain languages, varieties, and speakers receive. We did so starting from the text, the powerful text by Gloria Anzaldúa, where she said, if a person has a low estimation of my native tongue, she also has a low estimation of me. If you want to really hurt me, talk badly about my language. Until I can take pride in my language, I cannot take pride in myself. And I hope at this point, at the end of the semester, that I hope you have all at least taken pride in your language and in your linguistic practices. And I created this little poster today with all the different languages that are spoken in this class and that you shared through your linguistic sharing videos and through your linguistic biographies, from which we all learned a lot. And as you see, most people in this class are bilingual, and we have so many languages spoken in this class from South Asia, from Southeast Asia, or East Asia, Europe, the Caribbean, Arabic languages, and also different varieties of Spanish. Great. So, however, even if linguistically there's no way to say that one language or variety is better than another, socially, some languages, because of the global and local power relationships, are positioned differently in these social hierarchies, as Bourdieu reminds us. So a language is worth what those who speak it are worth. Then we also talked a lot about bilingualism, and we saw how all new creoles that are being formed as Chicano Spanish, for example, are not incorrect. They are a living language because language is alive. However, in some parts of the world, such as the US, but also in other countries, there are monoglossic language ideologies that position idealized monolingualism in the standard national language, so a standard white American English, as the norm to which all national subjects should aspire. Even if most people in the world, more than half of the people of the world are bilingual, and a lot of people in the US are bilingual, as can be seen, for example, in this class, where most people are bilingual themselves. So most of you were already very familiar with the concept of code switching, but in this class, we were working with the concept of translanguaging, which adopts the perspective of the individual, the view from inside the speaker. Translanguaging then means the deployment of a speaker's full linguistic repertoire without regard to the socially and political defined boundaries between languages. But the whole linguistic repertoire that the bilingual person has and can use. This is very transformative, for example, in education, because it allows to recognize the languages and the linguistic knowledges that the student already has, consider them an asset, and build from there, expanding that linguistic repertoire. Then we spend a big time in this course talking about language and social differentiation. So we started seeing how ways of speaking index certain social characteristics. Here, remember the concept of indexicality that can be very valuable to you in different moments of your life and also in college. So that then, as Blomaert warned us in the text about the asylum seeker in the United Kingdom, what happens when your linguistic repertoire does not correspond to what is expected for your identity? So the way we talk can either grant us or deny us access to social, political, and economic opportunities. For example, think about jobs, schools, housing, etc. Then, drawing on the text by Irving and Gall, we saw specifically certain semiotic processes by which ideologies misrecognize these linguistic differences. The first one was iconization, which is when linguistic features that index these social groups appear to be iconic, so appear to be natural, that there's a natural relationship between that way of speaking and that identity. Fractal recursivity was the projection of an opposition onto another level. And then erasure, which is maybe the easier to understand, is the process in which some persons, activities, languages, speakers are rendered invisible. So one example of iconization is what we have studied about race and language. So this concept of indexicality, this process of indexicality allows linguistic profiling, which is the auditory equivalent of visual racial profiling. So whether we like it or not, we not only see race, but we also hear it. Racial linguistic ideologies that we have explored in this class conflate certain racialized bodies with linguistic deficiency unrelated to any objective linguistic practices. So no matter how they actually speak, produce language, these bodies of these speakers are always linked, always indexed. That's why it's an iconization process, linguistic deficiency. So the white listening subject, that remember is not necessarily a white individual, but it can be an institution or a technology or even a non-white person, is more like a mode of perception. So this mode of perception, the white listening subject, hears and interprets the linguistic practices of language minoritized populations always as deficient and as deviant. Okay, however, even if this is super important, as we have seen in this class, and this happens every day, there is not a public dialogue about the role of language in the perpetuation of these social inequalities. Okay. So then we also reflected about who can make their voice be heard and who cannot, what voices are heard and what voices are not heard in society. This, of course, relates to race, as we have seen, but also, for example, to colonialism, as Fanon reminded us. In France, one says he talks like a book. In Martinique, he talks like a white man. So that's why he said that every colonized man has to face the problem of language. Or as Alim and Smitherman ask us, why must Black Americans shift towards styles considered white in order to be successful? So what we have to remember here is that all of these notions, such as standard language or even academic language, are not objective linguistic categories, but are racialized ideological perceptions. We also saw, thinking about who has access, whose voice can be heard and whose cannot, we also saw how women are interrupted in different cultures around the world by men and have not the same right and opportunities to be heard as men have. And we also saw how, for example, in the US, people with foreign accents are represented in negative ways. So finally, I encourage you to go back to the syllabus and see the learning goals of this course and try to see if we did achieve these goals together. But today, what I want to share with you, and with this we will end, is the political goals that I hope we can all share after finishing this semester, after finishing this course of language in cross-cultural perspective. The first one would be to show society that language plays a very important role on broader social and cultural issues, as you have learned in this during this semester. A second goal would be to shift our focus from modifying racially minoritized subject linguistic practices to contesting modes of perception. And maybe some of you will end up being teachers or being managers, and that will be your opportunity to start making this important shift. Or maybe today in your daily life, you can already start doing so. Thirdly, I encourage you all to challenge preconceived notions about language, but also about citizenship, about national identity, about exclusion, in connection to everything we have seen in this class. And finally, I hope we can all understand and pay attention to the everyday practices through which speakers creatively contest, reimagine, and redefine ethno-racial, geopolitical, and linguistic borders. So it's been a great pleasure to share this semester with you all. I'm looking forward to reading all your Milestone 3 projects. And please always reach out if you need anything or if you want to continue discussing any of the topics we saw along this semester. So thank you very much for everything. Congratulations to you all, and let's keep in touch. Thank you.